US President Donald Trump has spoken by phone for the fourth time with the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. According to Putin's aide Yuri Ushakov, the conversation lasted about 1 hour and 10 minutes. Trump, on his social network, Truth Social, indicated a slightly longer duration for the conversation, 1 hour and 15 minutes. But this does not change the main fact. Trump listened to yet another round of accusations from Zelensky against Ukraine and its leadership. Namely that Putin called the Ukrainian leadership terrorists and promised to deliver a retaliatory strike against Ukraine for the Sunday attacks on Russian military airfields. And what did Trump say to that, you might ask? Nothing at all. Trump simply stated the facts, and as we understand from the readout, the transcript of this phone conversation, he said nothing in response to Putin. An excellent result, to which, frankly speaking, there is probably nothing more to add. Western media have reported details of Operation Web, which was carried out by the Security Service of Ukraine. Russian media have found out where Artem Timofeyev has gone, the person whom the Russian investigation suspects of organizing attacks on the territory of the Russian Federation against Russian military bases. And he has disappeared, left for Kazakhstan together with his wife. Meanwhile, President Zelensky made major personnel changes in the military leadership yesterday, and the attacks on Russian military airfields have unexpectedly affected China. How is all of this interconnected? Let's talk about all of this. So President Donald Trump wrote on the social network Truth Social that he had just finished a phone conversation with Putin, which lasted 1 hour and 15 minutes. As Trump wrote, we discussed the attack by Ukraine, real Russian aircraft, as well as a number of other attacks that have taken place on both sides. And naturally, as Trump writes, it was a very good conversation, but not one that will lead to immediate peace. President Putin stated very firmly that he would have to respond to the recent attack on the airfields. In addition, President Trump discussed the nuclear deal with Iran with Putin, and he noted, I think we have reached an agreement. The only question left is to ask Iran whether it knows that Trump has reached an agreement with it. Most likely it does not. Putin's aide, Yuri Ushakov, gave an even more detailed and comprehensive account of the essence of these telephone talks, and among various other things, Ushakov writes with satisfaction that the Kiev regime did not inform the American administration about the attacks on Russian airfields. So, from Putin's point of view, Trump is clean. He didn't know anything. As for the strike on the military airfields, I quote Ushakov, this topic was also touched upon. Moreover, Donald Trump once again confirmed that the Americans had not been informed about this in advance. Naturally, the leaders agreed to continue their contacts on the Ukrainian issue. What a tricky word, issue, including at the highest level. In addition, Vladimir Putin gave Trump a detailed account of the results of the direct Russian-Ukrainian negotiations in Istanbul. As was emphasized, Ukraine tried to disrupt the negotiations by carrying out targeted attacks on civilian targets and peaceful populations under the direct orders of the Kiev regime, stated Yuri Ushakov. And then Putin himself directly accused Zelensky of terrorism and said that, frankly, after this, there is absolutely nothing left to discuss with him. The official spokesperson of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova, as well as Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov, also made similar statements. And now, as we can see, Putin himself has done the same. So there are three main narratives that Russian propaganda has now actively begun to promote, three, I would say, information special operations. The first concerns explosions of two bridges, one in Kursk region, one in Bryansk region. The official versions changed several times. At first, the investigative committee said it was a terrorist attack. Then they said, no, it wasn't. The bridges collapsed on their own. In the end, they returned once again to the original version. So there were three versions involved in this, and that's the first special operation. The second special operation is related to the so-called 6,000 frozen bodies of Ukrainian soldiers. This special operation is being actively pushed by Russian propaganda media and Russian Telegram channels. In reality, this was mentioned even by a representative of the Ukrainian leadership. A significant portion of these bodies are Russians of the 200th generation. In other words, they are trying to return the bodies of killed Russian soldiers and pass them off as Ukrainian. And this figure, 6,000 frozen bodies, it's being pushed everywhere by all the bots, all the bot farms. And it's actually it's noticeable. You can see it. And finally, the third topic is kidnapping, that is the abduction of Ukrainian children. Today, Medinsky showed Putin a list of, as he claimed, 339 names of Ukrainian children, which the Ukrainian delegation handed over during the negotiations in Istanbul. And he stated that the list was allegedly falsified. The Russian Federation's Commissioner for Human Rights, Lyubova Belova, Putin's accomplice, by the way, she is internationally wanted. The Hague Tribunal has stated that Russia allegedly did not abduct children from Ukraine. All the children here are with relatives. Medinsky himself claimed that Ukraine staged a show for supposedly sentimental European grandmothers. Well, Medinsky is a first-class scoundrel. I think that's already perfectly clear and obvious to everyone. And these three information special operations are now being actively promoted by the Kremlin through its spokespersons. By the way, the Kremlin might soon have one less spokesperson. Well, at the very least, they'll cut out his tongue. We are, of course, talking about the notorious agent of the Russian Special Services, Mr. Shari, whom a court in Ukraine today accused of an act of treason and sentenced Tolik to 15 years of imprisonment. Yes, of course, the sentence was delivered in absentia. He's hiding out in Catalonia, living near Barcelona, which is no secret, really, and it's obvious he'll try to stay there as long as possible. By the way, he's already hired private security for himself. He's even talked about this himself, claiming that someone is allegedly trying to eliminate him. But if anyone does want to eliminate Tolik, it would most likely be his Russian handlers, in order to cover up all traces behind them. So it's clear that Tolik will have to keep looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life. And he might not have as much time left as he probably thinks, since his Moscow handlers usually don't forgive mistakes. But that's me digressing from the main point. So these are the three main narratives that Kremlin propaganda is actively pushing right now. Today, Putin called what happened in the Bryansk and Kursk regions a terrorist act and stated that the decisions were made at the political level. In other words, he is directly accusing Zelensky here. Of course, the civilians suffer everywhere, but what happened in the Bryansk region was a deliberate strike against civilians. According to all international norms, such actions are called terrorism. This only confirms our fears that the already illegitimate regime in Kyiv, which once seized power, is gradually turning into a terrorist organization, and its sponsors are becoming accomplices to terrorists. Let me remind you, at about 22:44, this happened over the weekend near the village of Vigonichi, where a road bridge collapsed on the Pilshino-Vigonichi section. A passenger train number 86, Klimov-Moscow was passing there. As a result, 7 people died, including the train driver. More than 100 people were injured. Also, at 2:30 Moscow time, in the Zheleznogorsk district of the Kursk region, a railway bridge collapsed on the Trosno-Kalinovka route. The train driver and his 2 assistants were injured. There were no fatalities here. The official representative of the investigative committee of the Russian Federation, Svetlana Petrenko, changed her version. At first, she stated that it was Ukrainian saboteurs, then said it collapsed on its own, but in the end, they returned to the original version. And of course, the propaganda and Putin himself immediately declared that all of this was done on Zelensky's orders in order to disrupt the negotiations. But naturally, as the wise Maria Zakharova and the equally wise Yuri Ushakov explained to us, we did not fall for the provocation, we did not give in, we did not follow their lead, and naturally the negotiations continued in Istanbul. But now, judging by Putin's statements, these negotiations have come to an end, especially since Trump has already said that after his talks with Putin, the latter stated that he intends to strike. This is in fact already expected both by the Ukrainian General Staff and by NATO. Well, in general, there was never any doubt that Putin would always act in exactly this way. There is nothing new here. But as a result of this attack, about a third of Russia's strategic aviation was put out of action. This information, by the way, has already been confirmed by NATO. They stated that Operation Web dealt the most serious blow to Russian strategic aviation bases. And as an unnamed NATO representative stated in an interview with the Moscow Times, up until now, Russia apparently did not need any particular pretext for heavy strikes, but now it will most likely use this operation as a reason to intensify attacks and drag out negotiations. The NATO source also said that Ukrainian forces managed to damage more than 40 Russian aircraft. You see? Independently, that is, there is already video confirmation. Today, by the way, the SBU released footage, and you can really see that more than 40 aircraft were hit, with between 10 and 13 of them destroyed, including at least one unique A-50 reconnaissance aircraft. And naturally, Putin immediately blamed Britain and the US, claiming that without their satellite intelligence, Ukrainian drones would not have been able to obtain targeting information. NATO responded to this. I cannot say whether Allied intelligence was used, but I want to emphasize the locations of Russian strategic aviation bases are publicly available information. But again, let me repeat, there is nothing new here for us. By the way, as I already mentioned, the attack on Russian bases affected the delivery of goods from the People's Republic of China. This was also reported by the Moscow Times. It was noted that because of this, there has been a mass inspection of trucks coming from China, particularly those passing through Kazakhstan. As is well known, Kazakhstan and Russia do not have a customs border. And this has already led to a significant tightening of cargo control, particularly at border checkpoints with China and Mongolia. In addition, mobile traffic police posts have been set up, inspecting trucks on the roads, especially those with Chelyabinsk license plates, and they are even opening those that have customs seals. As a result, it is primarily the deliveries of goods from China that are suffering. Another, well, a good, interesting bonus, I would say quite an important one, at least for us. As for the suspect believed to have organized this operation, Artem Timofeev, let me remind you, and his wife, a 37-year-old native of the city of Zhytomyr, and his wife, today information has already been published by Telegram channels. His wife, whose maiden name is Sherbakova Katerina, is a native of Kyiv. The media reported that her mother and younger brother still live in the Ukrainian capital. As for the Timofeev couple, they left Russian territory in advance before June 1st. On the day of the attack, they were in Kazakhstan, where, by the way, they were celebrating their wedding anniversary. They got married exactly on the 1st, which is, as they say, a strange coincidence, though I don't think so, on June 1st, 2016. So they registered their marriage on June 1st, and, well, that's exactly when all these attacks took place. Interesting, right? Quite a coincidence, really. Although maybe not. Earlier, the insider found out that Timofeev was the owner of 4 trucks from which Ukrainian drones were launched in the Murmansk, Ryazan, Ivanovo, and Irkutsk regions. He is already wanted by the authorities. All 4 truck drivers have already been detained by Russian punitive agencies and are being interrogated. Well, it is reported that naturally the whereabouts of Timofeev and his wife are unknown. But I'll repeat once again, this is the version of the Russian authorities. They suspect that he is their direct organizer. The Ukrainian side, of course, has not given any comments on this matter, nor for that matter has Mr. Timofeev himself. His opinion on this matter is unknown. The alliance, however, has described Operation Web as extremely successful. It is reported that, according to NATO, 15 Tu-95 strategic bombers and 20 Tu-22s were hit, a total of 35, and at least one unique A-50 long-range reconnaissance aircraft, of which Russia has only about a dozen left in service. Thus, about 34% of the missile carriers in service with Russia's strategic aviation have been damaged or put out of commission. Nevertheless, the Russians will be able to use some of the other aircraft that are already non-operational as donors and possibly restore some of these planes. However, all of this significantly reduces Russia's ability to carry out further missile strikes. It does not eliminate this capability completely, but it does reduce it to a rather serious degree, let's say. And now we are also receiving some very alarming news from our neighbor, Moldova. In particular, the Prime Minister of Moldova, Dorin Risian, stated in an interview with the British Financial Times that the Russian occupiers are planning to change the government in Moldova and seek to deploy a 10,000-strong contingent in the unrecognized Transnistria, the Pridnestrovian Moldavian Republic. As Dorin Risian stated, Russian interference is already planned for the parliamentary elections, which will take place in September of this year, 2025. The Russian side will try to actively influence and interfere through online propaganda, as well as illegal money transfers in favor of pro-Moscow political parties and figures, and will also literally buy votes, that is, through postal transfers. An interesting story. According to Dorin Risian, Russia will try to change the pro-European course of Moldova's government and secure an expanded military presence in the region. You can only imagine what kind of influence and pressure the presence of 10,000 soldiers would exert on the southwest of Ukraine. But this is also close to Romania, a NATO member state. As of today, there are officially about 1,500 Russian soldiers on the territory of Transnistria. They are essentially trapped there. They can't leave, can't be reinforced, and can't rotate personnel. They have been blocked there since 2022, although initially it was planned that this group would attack the Odessa region and capture Odessa. But as the saying goes, things didn't turn out as planned, and now they are blocked there. Moreover, the vast majority of these Russian soldiers are actually local natives of Transnistria who simply obtained Russian passports. There are practically no Russian special forces left there anymore. Or if there are any left, it's literally just a few dozen people, and naturally they can't have any significant impact. Transnistria is completely blocked off on one side by Ukrainian troops, and on the other side by the military of the Republic of Moldova. So their situation is rather unenviable. They can't do anything. However, the scenario that Rechan describes is quite alarming. No matter how far-fetched it may seem, it's very important to pay attention to it. As for the statements by Putin and Trump, there is no doubt that Putin is preparing a strike. The question is, will it happen this week or next week? They will undoubtedly be preparing a response. The strike will be carried out, as they have always done, using a combined missile and drone attack. And drones will be launched, hundreds of drones, as well as ballistic and cruise missiles. But there are also certain, let's say, limitations here. Our adversary produces and manufactures a certain number of missiles. We're talking about dozens of missiles of each type, not hundreds, dozens. As a rule, this number fluctuates between 10 and 30 on average. Let me repeat, the average production quantity, but they don't have that many missiles left in their arsenal. In other words, the enemy can hardly afford to carry out several strikes, yes. They might decide on one serious strike using dozens of missiles of all types, aeroballistic, ballistic, cruise missiles, and of course, hundreds of drones. By the way, the US Embassy has already warned today that American citizens should not ignore air raid alerts. There is no warning to leave, so there is no panic, but simply a reminder that if there are air raid alerts and a warning from the American Embassy, you should immediately take shelter. And of course, we understand why. But Trump's reaction is very strange, I would say. He hasn't commented in general on the attacks carried out on Russian military airfields nor on the Kerch Bridge. And his more than vague conversation with Putin during their phone call is already, honestly, such a worn-out topic that, to be frank, I don't even really want to go back to it. But most importantly, none of this will change anything. Trump presents himself as an independent mediator. And finally, the real cherry on top, a pleasant piece of news. A patrol of French Mirage 2000 fighter jets, while flying over the Black Sea, created a flight path. It formed the Ukrainian coat of arms, the Trident. This was reported by the command of the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Today, the media also reported this, citing Flight Radar 24. Millions of users around the world saw it today, as did the Ukrainian military. and Ukrainian pilots sincerely thank the French pilots for this gesture of friendship, a public display of friendship and support from our important ally, France. As they say, vive la France, friends. Thank you. On this positive note, we'll end our review for today. Take care of yourselves and subscribe to the channel. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the armed forces. Glory to the Ukrainian special forces. Glory to the Ukrainian territorial defense forces. And of course, glory to all our allies. Take care of yourselves. As always, this was Major Taras BEREZOVETS of the Ukrainian Army with you. See you next time. Bye-bye.